So you're looking to get into roasting your own coffee from home, but you want to start out on a budget. Well, we got two options for you today.
That's right, today we're going to be showing you how to roast using a skillet on your stove and with a hot air popcorn popper.
Stay tuned. Hello everybody, welcome back to Cork and Java, your go-to place for coffee and wine, reviews, and how-tos. If you're new to this channel and that's something that interests you, consider hitting that subscribe button below. And without further ado, my friend James, he's going to show you how to do some roasting.
Well, hello everybody. Today we're going to be roasting using the skillet method, and there's a few things that we're going to need going into this. Of course, you're going to need your coffee beans. I of course get mine from Sweet Maria's. They got a wide variety there. Also, you're going to need a scale to weigh your coffee, and it's very important that you are consistent in weighing your coffee when you roast. And I know you might have a lot of room and you want to try to pack as much as you can in there, but being consistent with your roasts is how you can make those fine tunes so that you can have a consistent roast. So we want to have a scale. Also, we want to have a colander that we can put the beans in afterwards, something that they can cool in properly. Some people like metal so that it can cool off a little bit better. Some people have other cooling methods, but this colander should do. And also, you want to have something that you can stir with, preferably a wooden spoon, but I have one of these not heat-resistant spatulas, so this is what we're going to use today. And also, we're going to keep a timer going so that we can keep track and make mental notes, or even physical notes if you want, of how the roast is progressing, so that we can, the next time we roast, seek for consistency. Okay, so now we're going to weigh up some of our coffee for that consistency we were talking about. While I've been doing this, I've been also preheating my skillet, trying to create a warm atmosphere that I'm going to put it in by covering it. And some people like to use lower level skillets, but I find using pots a little more helpful because it helps you create that warm atmosphere rather than allowing a lot of that heat to escape. And so we're going to go ahead and weigh up our coffee. And so for this, we're just going to do 60 grams. You can do as much as you want, but remember, whatever you use this time, use the following times for consistency. So we're gonna we're gonna add our coffee in. And as you can see right now, I have it on about a medium to about a little more than a medium setting right now, just to kind of warm it up. And so right now it's still kind of warming up, so it's not super hot. So as this is going to ramp up, so your beans are going to ramp up as well. But go ahead and just kind of give them a shake so they can kind of spread around. And make sure to hit your timer. We're going to give several minutes to warm up. We're just going to keep an eye on it. So with skillet roasting, it's probably one of the more intimate ways that you can roast. A lot of people like skillet roasting because you can actually watch the whole process happen. And that's what we're going to do. So we're mainly keeping time, not necessarily to really time a roast, which that is important, but it's more so for that consistency, so we know where these levels are going to develop. But mainly we're going to be using our sight to see the color of the bean change. We're going to smell the different aromas as they progress, and we're going to listen for any kind of cracking. So you always want to keep some kind of movement on it going. And so while it's ramping up in temperature, I'm leaving this lid on so I can continue to keep that atmosphere. Now as it gets up a little bit higher in temperature, I'll take it off and start stirring it. But for right now, I'm just going to kind of shuffle it around while it ramps up. Alright, so now we are almost at 4 minutes right now, about 10 seconds till. And we're starting to see some changes with our beans. So as you notice, we're starting to see some of that color change that's going on. And you'll notice some chaff also starting to release from off of the beans. So we're starting to see that transition. And you'll see the steam coming off too. You're gonna wanna smell that. So right now, you're not gonna smell coffee per se like you would in a coffee house, but right now I'm smelling kind of like a bready, grassy smell that is telling me that there's things that are caramelizing, and then there's, well, about to caramelize, and various chemical reactions happening. One of the chemical reactions that's happening right now, as you're seeing it turn brown, is called the Maillard reaction. And you've probably noticed this if you've ever, cooked with milk. If you've ever seen any kind of milk splash on your burner or anything, you'll see it kind of like bubble up and turn brown. And that browning reaction is the proteins, from reacting to the heat. And so the same thing happens with your coffee beans. And so now I'm gonna stir and keep stirring until we reach our first crack. So when it comes to roasting, you do want to keep constant movement so you don't scorch any of the surface of your beans. And that's why you want to create a good atmosphere. But how fast you ramp it up will play a big difference on how bright the cup is. So the faster it ramps up, the brighter the cup's going to be. But you also have to understand a lot of those chemical reactions will also be very short too. So if you want a full-bodied cup, you'll have to roast it a little bit slower. Me, I kind of like the brightness, so I put it on a little bit higher so that I can, get it ramped up pretty quickly. But also, since these flavor notes are usually very fruity, because this is an Ethiopian that we're roasting, a dry process, I usually like brighter flavors with. You can edit that out, can't you?
Yeah.
Okay, edit this out. So we're gonna put the lid back on and start shaking. And we're gonna start hearing in a second the first crack. We heard one little one in there, but usually they'll all start rolling in a second. And you can see the smoke kind of coming off. And as these heat up, they're going to start generating their own heat after a while, but that's not till after the first crack. At about 8:41, we're hearing our first crack. And so if you hear that, it'll kind of sound like popcorn. Now, as it starts cracking, there's a few different things you can do. Now, if you try to speed through the first crack, you'll have a little bit more of kind of a little more acidic taste. But if you slow down the crack, it'll be a little bit sweeter of a taste. But you kind of want both, so you don't want to have it too slow to where it stalls. Then it will become almost like a heartier, kind of beefier cup. But since we want to develop those good fruit flavors, we're going to try to just slow it down just enough to develop the sweetness. And we're rounding about 10 minutes right now. Now that cracking that you hear, for those who don't really know what's going on, that cracking is essentially just the water releasing from the actual bean. The actual bean will crack open. And there's actually kind of two phases for that. This is the first crack, and then there's also a second crack. So the first one is just the water vapor trying to release. The second one is actually the cellular structure cracking. So I'm trying to work through the first crack, but I'm just trying to make sure most of them are cracked. And that's kind of the problem, the downfall with skillet roasting. It's really hard to get a consistent roast because, like, as you look in here, you'll see some are darker than others, and that's just kind of gonna come with it. I mean, you can eventually perfect it to where, which is really hard to do, where everything looks consistent, but this is probably your least consistent method. So for the sake of this video, I am gonna take you to second crack to show you what that second crack is. Yeah, so right now we are actually in the second crack. That went a whole lot faster than I was expecting. And so always be mindful of your coffee because it can get away from you. So always pay attention. And so if you can hear it, it's a lot sharper of a sound. It's more like crackling than it is popping. So the first crack is more of like a pop, pop, pop like you would from popcorn. The second one is more of crackling like you would hear in a fire or pop rocks. And as you can see, the beans are actually starting to get oily. And we're gonna go ahead and cut this temperature because they're starting to get hot. And now, we're gonna take them right out. And I'm actually going to kind of try to give them as much air as possible and also have a vent so you can suck that smoke out. So there's a few different ways that you could remove the chaff. I like using a colander like this because I can shake it around and the chaff comes out pretty easily. You can also blow on it. Some people will also sift it from one colander to another and blow as they go. And there's a few different methods, but it's going to be pretty messy when you roast in a skillet. That's another downfall, is you'll often get a lot of chaff in a lot of places, so always have a vacuum on hand. So here's our finished product. As you can see, like we said earlier, it's hard to get consistency amongst your whole roast. You'll see some darker beans and you'll see some lighter beans. But overall, we hit the second crack and we managed to get about a full city, which is a little in between medium and dark. It's probably closer to dark than anything, but it's about a full city. And some of the pros, like we said, it's cheap, easy to do. You probably already have the equipment. But some of the downsides, like we said, it's messy, a lot of chaff everywhere, smoke is in your house. And it's not consistent, but it does make a good cup of coffee. Now, onto roasting with the popcorn popper. All right, so now we're onto our popcorn popper. Now, just a little bit about this popcorn popper. It's an air popcorn popper, and on the inside of it, it's very important that you make note, and mine's kind of dirty, mind you, that on the inside, you'll notice that there are vents that come out the side of it. Some air popcorn poppers will have a mesh screen at the bottom and blows air directly up. You don't want that kind of air popcorn popper. This one, you want the air to circulate in a cyclical pattern. And so with that, we'll go ahead and add our coffee pre-weighed. And I've preheated this already for a minute to make sure that everything is warmed up and ready to go. So I'm gonna add my coffee in. Put the lid back on and turn it on. Now, I'll also stir it just to get it started. And I often use something that's wooden. I use a chopstick, only because so it doesn't shock the beans. If you use like a cold spoon or something like that, I mean, it probably doesn't make too much difference, but it's always best to maintain thermal equilibrium when you're interacting with the beans as much as possible. And so I'm gonna go ahead and stir it until it'll start spinning on its own. You can see it's already starting to blow the chaff off, so this is a very quick process. I'm actually gonna... Whew. And it gets hot sometimes, so I want to use this. And once the beans lose enough water from evaporation, they'll get light enough to spin inside, and so then you can place the cap back on. And I put a little bowl right here to catch all the chaff, because this method can also be very messy. Not as messy, but a little bit better. And as you can see, we've already hit the first crack very quickly. So if it does hit very quickly, you can always remove the cap to release some of that heat as well. Kind of slow things down. So I'm going to give it another stir just to make sure that the same beans aren't scooting along the wall. To try to make sure everything is getting evenly roasted. Now this makes a really bright cup. I've gotten a lot of compliments using this air popcorn popper. Personally, I like this method the best. I think it makes the brightest cup. I think it brings out the best depth of flavors when it comes to any kind of like stone fruit or molasses. But with this air that's cycling, this process is a fluidic bed. And there's other industrial roasters that use this method. A lot of popular roasters will use drum roasters and convection, but fluidic beds are still very popular. And you can pick up one of these air popcorn poppers at Bed Bath & Beyond for like 15 bucks, so it really isn't that expensive. All right, and so we're pretty much already almost at the end of our roast cycle, and it's only been probably about 3 minutes, so not very long. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut it. Just give it a few minutes. And so as you're smelling, you want to try to smell for developed flavors. So any kind of grassy smells, you want to wait till a lot of those leave. But right now I'm starting to smell some chocolatey notes, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut it off. And I'm gonna dump it right in. And so you can see our coffee is a lot more consistent than it was with the skillet roast. And you can see a lot of the chaff kind of blew out because of the forced air, which means it's less blowing for you. There's still some in there, but not as much, so it's at least not as much in your final product. One thing you do have to take note of, a lot of the more recent ones that are being sold have regulators on them that won't allow the temperature to get hot enough to roast to your desire. A lot of people will mod these by removing those regulators so that it'll ramp up, and some people get even crazy to where they'll add thermocouples in there, as well as their own kind of potentiometers to where they can mod it themselves. But regularly you can just toss it in there, cut it on, and make sure that things are moving and consistent, and you'll get a fairly decent cup for super easy. Another downfall of this, it's very limited in what it can roast. As you saw, I used about 55 grams. Probably at most this can do 60 grams. So it's a very small content.
Well, that's gonna do it here at Cork and Java. If you like this, please leave a comment below with what method you've used to roast coffee from home. And also, we got a Facebook group, it's Cork and Java. We got a Twitter as well, that's @CorkJava. And also we got a Pinterest, which is pinterest.com/corkandjava. And until next time, bottoms up.